Live from the Scheinfeld Center Innovator Studio at Santa Barbara City College, it's the Enlightened Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Sampson, Director of the Scheinfeld Center. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here to build livelihoods that matter, be your own boss, and make the world an even better place. Well, as a leader, you're focused on getting things done. But are you dealing effectively with your behaviors that detract from your performance and get in the way of your desired outcomes? You can't change what you're not aware of. And that's why today we're fortunate to explore leadership derailers with entrepreneur, author, speaker, and performance coach, Gregg Vanourek. Gregg, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Julie, thank you. It's great to be with you and the folks at the Scheinfeld Center.
This is your second time with us, so we're so fortunate. Thank you so much. Our students love learning from you, and I think this is going to be another great one today. So you are an exemplary leader as an educator at the Stockholm Business School. You're co-author of 3 influential books. You're founder of your leadership and personal development company. And one of your accomplishments is that you do research on leadership derailers, and you've designed your own leadership derailer assessment that helps leaders identify their derailers and create strategies to manage them for a better life experience. So let's start from the beginning. What are leadership derailers, and why is it important that we become aware of them, aware of our own derailers?
Yes. So leadership derailers are the things that inhibit our leadership effectiveness. They're the things that if we're on a leadership track, they take us off the track and get us into trouble. And my observation is that in the leadership space, entrepreneurship, personal development, a lot of times we're talking about all the things that we should do. We should be clear, we should be visionary, we should be innovative, we should communicate well. And we often overlook the things that get us into trouble. So I think it's really important for us as leaders, emerging leaders and entrepreneurs, to try to be aware of the things that get us into trouble. Otherwise, it's going to be like a broken record that just keeps playing and showing up and causing us problems throughout our career.
Excellent. So let's talk about some of the common ways, personally or professionally, academically, that leadership derailers show up.
I think they show up both in our organizational work, in our group work, in academic settings, and in our personal life. And so they're the kinds of things that cause friction with other people. Sometimes we have a sense of it. Often we're not aware of it. And so they will get in the way of our team effectiveness, of our interpersonal effectiveness, and they will even start affecting our motivation and our outlook, our mindset towards things. We have a sense that something's wrong, but we haven't quite yet figured out how to fix it. And so it just keeps slowing us down, causing us trouble. So it can really do a lot of damage. And so that's why I'm so passionate about bringing this work to people, because I think we all have work to do.
Okay, great. So you kind of alluded to with that last point that we all have leadership derailers. Is that true?
We do. At least I haven't found a single person yet that I've worked with or taught that doesn't have derailers. In fact, one of my favorite things to do, for example, when I teach at the executive MBA program at Stockholm Business School, I've got some pretty senior leaders as well as kind of middle career folks. Some of them are entrepreneurs, CEOs, folks who lead military units, business, government, et cetera. And, we talk about the derailers that go through this exercise. And many of them just say kind of like, I've got a bunch of them, or they kind of just circle all of them. And so a lot of these are and I think the point is that a lot of very successful leaders and entrepreneurs still have derailers. And so usually people have several, if not many. It's just, we're all human, we're all flawed, we all have work to do. And that's part of the journey.
Okay, great. So This is a really good point to bring up because, with the positive psychology movement, we often hear the advice that we should focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses. So could you help us parse out this seeming contradiction? Is there a difference between derailers and weaknesses? How do we make sense of this?
So the difference, I would say if you talk about your weaknesses, it's the things that are going to, get in the way of your effectiveness generally. And what I'm talking about are your leadership derailers. So I'm kind of saying, what are the things that inhibit your leadership effectiveness? So there's a lot of overlap between our weaknesses and our derailers. I think that, so I'm a big fan, for example, of the work of the Gallup organization, which famously brought this kind of research on strengths and leveraging your strengths at work and in leadership. And Tom, for example, wrote a wonderful book, Strengths Finder 2.0. It's a great tool. There's strengths-based leadership. And so I'm a big fan of that work. And I view my work on leadership derailers, Julie, as a companion to that and to other work. So for example, I think it's good to know your strengths, to leverage them and double down on them. And I wouldn't disagree with that. And also I would add in, what are your passions as well? What are the things that make you come alive? And you want to kind of bake that more into your days, into your work, into your family, into your studies, right? But I think the thing that I see that's missing is we need to be aware of our leadership derailers that inhibit our effectiveness. And I really, Gallup, I think, doesn't disagree with this. They say, don't focus on your weaknesses, but they don't say ignore your weaknesses. So they say be aware of your weaknesses. They say take action on them and work with other people who have different strengths and these kinds of things. And then they say use your strengths to mitigate your weaknesses. And so I think there's a lot of kind of agreement, and I'm just kind of building on their great work and other people's great work with this new work on leadership derailers.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for helping to clarify that. So you've done extensive work on understanding leadership derailers and working with leaders. You've identified 10 most common derailers. How did you come up with these particular 10?
Yeah, and actually, so I have the 10 most common, Julie, and I've also identified more than 60 common derailers. And so the tool is actually quite comprehensive. And so there's two answers to that. So one would be in terms of the top 10. I published an article on that about a year ago, and that was from my own work as a practitioner, working with coaching clients, teaching, executive, working with entrepreneurs, et cetera. And so it's kind of qualitative, more observational. And since that time, I put up this leadership derailers assessment on our Triple Crown Leadership website. And we now have data. And so as of the end of last month, we had 269 respondents to it who actually filled out the form, and they indicated on a 4-point scale which are the serious derailers versus all the way down to not a problem for them. And so I now have some new data, and I guess, but it's a little bit, it's emergent. It's still a work in progress. I'd like more data from around the world, et cetera. And I also, to build the tool, Julie, I looked at other people's research. I looked at the Gallup work, some other books on for example, Why Smart Executives Fail by Finkelstein. I looked at great work by Shirzad Shamin on positive intelligence and some other things. So kind of bake that into to the whole work on derailers.
Great. Yes. And for our audience, we link to many of the resources that you're talking about in the video description. So be sure and check those out. So let's get into it a bit, where I think probably the audience is thinking, okay, let's hear about the derailers so that we can figure out what ones we might have without shame, because like you're saying, everybody has some leadership derailers. So do you want to go through those most common 10?
Sure, that sounds good. And I'm glad that you said without shame, because this is really not a shaming tool. Again, as I said, I think we all have work to do. So this is meant to be a tool for you. It's meant to be a gift to say, here's some stuff that if you apply yourself to, it could really help you both in your effectiveness and your enjoyment of the leadership, because these things really get at us when we're in them. But some of the top 10 that I found, I've got them here. And you tell me if you want me to define any of these. Most of these I think will be pretty clear. But number one is sort of avoidance. So avoiding difficult tasks, situations, conflicts. Burnout is a big epidemic these days. Being a bottleneck, where you're kind of the decisions are all waiting on you as the authority to decide things. Having issues with not delegating enough. Feedback. And that's bi-directional, by which I mean not giving enough feedback to your team and not being open enough to receiving feedback. That's insecurity. A lot of high-powered leaders actually struggle with imposter syndrome, or they have doubts about their leadership. Perfectionism, procrastination, playing the short game, and that one is failing to invest in the future and deciding important things without really considering the long term. And the last one I'd mention for now is workaholism, which is being addicted to your work. You're so committed that it really degrades your health, your relationships, other aspects of your life. One of the other things, Julie, is I think there's probably a unique set of derailers for entrepreneurs that might be a little bit different from kind of general managers, et cetera.
Oh, that would be great. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so my sense of this, and I've been involved with startups and worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and taught entrepreneurship, and so this is kind of emerging data. So this is more of a qualitative sense, but many entrepreneurs, I think, Julie, struggle with chaos, kind of bringing so much that things aren't that they're confusing for their team, not communicating enough because things are going so quickly, being kind of competitive, overly competitive in ways that shut people down, not investing in culture enough, not developing people enough because they're so busy or things are so fast, getting caught up in ego, impulsive, just idea of the day, their team's kind of scrambling, being a little unrealistic, volatile, and again, workaholism, I would say, is a big problem for entrepreneurs as well.
Wow. Okay. So those are all very insightful. And I know that as you were going through both your first list of the top 10 and the one kind of focused on entrepreneurs, I related to a few. I can actually see how kind of there's for me, in my experience, kind of a constellation where some of those kind of connect to the others rather than just being a standalone. But part of the question that I have is, are we good assessors of our own derailers, or are we maybe sometimes delusional? Do we need the input from other people? What's your experience with that? And like, if we do need input from other people, how do we go about that? Can we unpack that whole thing?
Yeah, that I think is a really important question, Julie. So I think it's a bit mixed. My answer is that I think we're actually pretty good at knowing some of our derailers, maybe even many. We know ourselves quite well. We've been in lots of different work situations, academic group work, family, maybe sports teams or theater. But I also think that most of us have some pretty significant blind spots. And so that really raises the importance of being collaborative and being not only open to feedback on your derailers, but actually actively soliciting it. It's a superpower if you're good at soliciting feedback and making people feel comfortable with giving you feedback, because feedback can be a little bit awkward. And so that's why on the online tool, I designed some kind of sharing tool. So it's very easy for kind of teams and people to kind of do it together, which I highly recommend because of the point that you raised. Okay,
so can you give us some ideas? So say, sometimes organizations have this, 360-degree feedback baked into their culture, and it's a way that they do things. But often for startups, like you were saying, not developing the culture is sometimes one of the leadership derailers. sometimes this isn't baked into the way we're going about our professional lives. And so in those circumstances, what are good ways to ask for this feedback? Because just kind of out of the blue, like if there isn't a culture, kind of supporting that inquiry, that could be a little bit awkward. How can we make it less awkward? And how can we, like you say, ask in a way where we can get honest feedback? It can be hard for people sometimes to give feedback. What are the best way? Do you have any suggestions for how to go about that?
Yeah. Well, let me back up. So two things. So like you, Julie, I'm not only a practitioner of entrepreneurship, but I'm a student of entrepreneurship and leadership. And I've really learned a lot from Steve Blank, one of the founders of the lean startup movement and customer development. And he wrote a great article about organizational debt. It's this metaphor of like technical debt. When you're coding in a hurry at a startup, sometimes you kind of take shortcuts and whatnot. You got to go back later and refactor it so the whole platform doesn't kind of melt down. And in the same way with our culture, we take some shortcuts in high growth startups, and we don't do enough feedback. To your point, we don't do enough development. And so I think, I'm a big fan of the 360s that you mentioned. And for anybody who's not familiar with that, that's a tool where you get feedback all the way around you. So if you're here in an organization, you get feedback from your boss above you, from your colleagues beside you, from anybody that reports to you, kind of all the way around. You can even, if you're a student, for example, you can get feedback from your classmates, your group mates. You could get from your siblings, from your parents, from coaches, maybe a teacher or something like that. And so it's really, you're wise to get it. But I think one of the things that's missing in feedback is feedback can be kind of general and vague, and you really have to show people that you really want to improve. So it would be very helpful to you if they could not only be nice and help you, feel good, but help you identify ways to improve. And so I think that's where, if you actually send the Derailers assessment itself to somebody else and you say, fill that out for me, and you can fill it out for you too, and maybe we can reciprocate, and we can give each other the beautiful gift of open, raw feedback that's kind of hard. And then you really have to receive it in a way that's not defensive. You don't defend, you don't demean, you don't dismiss. You're very inquisitive. Tell me more about that. How does that show up? And you really just take it in. And then, Julie, you say thank you. You look them in the eyes, because it's really hard, and they really have given you a gift. And then you build it in regularly. Are you doing this quarterly? Do you have kind of milestones for giving each other feedback? And if you do that, as I said, it's a superpower. It's going to help you so much with your leadership effectiveness.
That I really noticed how the words that you're using to describe this, that this is a gift. I think that's super important, in the way that we ask, how we position it. So that's great. Okay, so let's say we've gone through that process, and we've gotten some feedback. We've identified our derailers based on our own feedback from other people. What is your recommendation for a framework now for working with our derailers? Well, first of all, I guess, what should be the goal with working on derailers? Is it this thing where, we're going to conquer them, get over them, and then move on to the next ones? Or what should be the mindset for going about this?
Yeah. So, I think the mindset is certainly not perfection. That's the trap, the derailer of perfectionism. Perfectionism is really maladaptive. We're human. And so we are not perfect. Organizations are not perfect. And so the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be as excellent as possible, to be as good as you can. And if you chase excellence, as the great football coach Vince Lombardi said, you might be able to catch Sorry, if you chase perfection, you might be able to catch excellence, is the way he framed it. And so don't, the point is not to kind of be conquer and ever be done, because I think this is really dynamic, and things are going to change as we go through the seasons of our life. And I really love the work of Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck on kind of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, we believe that our intelligence, abilities, and talents are fixed. And so we're embarrassed, if not mortified, if we mess up, or if we get a derailer, or if we get a low score. And in a growth mindset, we believe that our intelligence, abilities, and talents can be developed. So if you give me some hard feedback and I have a growth mindset, I said, oh, that's exciting. Wow, because now I can work on that, and I can, it's like a puzzle, and how can I get a little bit better at that and everything. And so it's a totally different mindset. And it's that growth mindset is much more productive and enjoyable over time for all of us.
Yeah, such a good point. Okay, so now we kind of know the mindset to bring into it. Now, is there a framework for how to go about this? Because like you said, we all probably have several derailers. So how do we make this actionable on a day-to-day basis? Do you have some recommendations for that?
I do. So very, very simply, kind of four things in the framework. And this is very similar to what Gallup recommends with their work on strengths-based leadership. So one is awareness. We really have to bring the derailers into our awareness. Sometimes we know, often they're kind of subconscious, or we've got a blind spot. So that's why you get the feedback. Once we know the derailers, we have some data, we set an intention to get better and to improve things, right? And then, so that's the second one. The third thing is you really have to take action. You have to take action, and that's fundamental to what an entrepreneur is. An entrepreneur is the person. They take risks and whatnot. And so you just go make some changes, try some things, experiment, and then the fourth thing is review. And so you can almost think about that lean startup, the build, measure, learn sort of feedback loop. You go take action, and then you get some new data, you get some more feedback, you see how it went. What do I need to adjust to get a little bit better? So I would say awareness, intention, action, review.
Great. Now, I know the leadership derailer assessment that we link to, and that you have available, kind of helps you, helps the person who's taking the assessment identify actions, like you're saying, that can be taken, and then also review them. Now, when they're going through these steps, these 4 steps: awareness or knowledge, what was it? Awareness, attention, action, review. Yeah. So when they're going through these, is there any kind of tool, like how should we be tracking these, and should we make goals for ourselves, or have certain metrics that we're tracking with it? Like, how do we know after we've been working on them that it's like, oh yeah, I'm getting better, or not?
Yeah, I think goals are often a good thing, just to help us, help give it a little bit more teeth. There's the common acronym of SMART goals. That's pretty good. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time bound. My colleague Christopher Gergen and I actually wrote a book, Life Entrepreneurs. We interviewed 55 business and social entrepreneurs around the world. We developed our own kind of framework for how to think about goals. It's similar to SMART, but it's purposeful, prioritized, clear, and measurable. And then what's the last one? It's challenging but achievable. So that's kind of our framework for goals. I think when it comes to things like your derailers, I wouldn't get too caught up in kind of measurable and metrics. I think generally we're going to have this overall sense of whether things are getting better, but I also think we want to continue to get feedback. And that's going to be kind of, if we're not only feeling good that we're making progress, we're building some confidence that we're kind of doing better on this, but we're actually getting feedback from trusted people where we have a real open, we know that there's openness and that they're frank and they're not just lying to us to be nice. They're saying, yeah, you're actually getting better. I think that's that's a really useful thing. But I wouldn't get too caught up in, I mean, obviously you can get data from a team and you can kind of try to quantify that, but the sample's kind of small. So I'm not sure I would do too much with metrics in this area.
Okay. Okay, great. Great advice. We have some questions from the audience. Can denying your derailers hurt you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, yes, it very much can. I think so the great work of Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner on leadership, they're these researchers who have been publishing the Leadership Challenge, which is a blockbuster leadership book. It's a classic and it's sold millions of copies. And it's based on a data set of surveys of millions of managers and leaders around the world, as well as interviews and whatnot. One of the things that they point out, which I think is so powerful, is that credibility is just critical for your leadership. Credibility. And that has to do with whether you're perceived as honest and competent. And so if I am denying my derailers, I am destroying my credibility because I'm choosing to, or I'm not open to, I'm not aware, I'm not self-aware, I'm not open to feedback. And so showing my lack of competence and kind of lying to myself, and in a sense, bringing kind of poor leadership to others. And so I think people want to see that you're credible, that you're honest, but also that you're open to working on yourself and getting better. You want your team to get better, but you have to do the work too. And so that's where the work of Brene Brown on the power of vulnerability and connection is also an important aspect of leadership. So I would say definitely yes.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. What habits do you recommend to implement to combat derailers? What habits do you recommend?
Oh, I love that because, it's really the work of James Clear and Duhigg on the power of habits and the importance of habits. So it shows me the person asking the question is serious about, because if you're going to actually not only work on it, but you're going to make it a habit, boom, and by the way, part of the work from James Clear on habits is it's not only the mechanics of a habit, it's the change in identity that I feel when I do the thing consistently. I now identify as someone who works on my leadership and gets better. And so that changes things. So I would say one of the things that I think is important is on the awareness front, we can get busy, Julie, right? We got an entrepreneur, we got a million things going. Or if you're a student, you got a paper and all this. And so I kind of did that thing 6 months ago and I kind of forgot about that, right? And so keeping the important things in mind. And so like, what's your purpose? What's your values? What's your vision? What are my derailers? What are my strengths? And just keeping those front and center, right? And so having a system, you put it on a little card or whatnot, have a little sticky note on your computer or somewhere in your bathroom and whatnot. And then I think another habit that's kind of more broader, but that's key to leadership as well as derailers is self-leadership and self-care. A lot of the derailers we get so busy, we get so stressed, and then we got the stress cortisol, we got the fear, we're in the back of our brain, kind of the primitive part of our brain, because we're not taking care of ourselves. We take it for granted. And that's when leaders get tired and stressed, they start making bad decisions and getting into trouble. And so self-care is just one of those fundamental things, the foundation for good leadership, as well as addressing our derailers.
Excellent. That's super motivational. It makes me want to make sure after we're done that I get my exercise in today and then have a relaxing evening. Okay, let's see. Are there ways to use derailers to our advantage?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'd be interested to hear, Julie, if you have any thoughts on that. Yeah, I think that the derailers can be motivational, like you're hungry, right? And so if you're just always in the land of strengths and what you're good at, it's like you can maybe kind of get a little complacent, right? But hey, I've got work to do. I've got a couple derailers. My team's telling me I got work to do. So like, wow, I want to go get this. I want to attack this. And by the way, I think it's just a smart strategy to be careful not to go after too many derailers. Sometimes we're too ambitious and we've got you could easily have 5, 10 derailers. If you go after 5 derailers at once, you're not going to have that focus, and it can be overwhelming. So, generally for most people, I recommend attack your worst, most painful derailer, make progress, and then go to the next one, and then maybe the next one. But I think that motivational, that fire, it can give you a little fire under your belly, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that when you're going about working on this self-improvement, this, continuous improvement type of focus, that people sense that you're really taking responsibility for yourself and for your actions. And I think that has a very strong impact on people feeling trust with you. And you said, that you had talked about how honesty is so important for leaders, so I think it's a great way to demonstrate self-responsibility. And I think by leaders doing that, we also encourage others to do the same, and that helps build a healthy culture, I think. Yeah,
I love that, Julie. Just real quick, I think it shows you're not only working on yourself, but you're leading by example. People see that you're working on your derailers and say, oh, maybe I should work on my derailers too. So there's a good benefit for many by you doing the work.
Yeah, excellent. Well, if you can believe it, Gregg, that is our time. But maybe in closing, when we talk about motivation and, doing continuous improvement, is there any kind of a fact or statistic that you could share with us that demonstrates why we should actively work on our derailers right now?
Yeah, I think there's so many people, Julie, who are disengaged at work, who are frustrated, who are cynical, and there's all sorts of data on this. And and you see it in quiet quitting, and you see it in the Great Resignation. You see the pandemic raised a bunch of issues about a relationship with work and whatnot. And so many people, they quit their managers, right? Because their managers are failing them in some way, and so, we need better leadership. We just do. We've got so much work to do. And it's so important. There's so many challenges in our communities and our families and our schools and our world and our nation that are just really big, that require bold entrepreneurial action, character-based leadership, new ways of thinking. So we've just got to do better. I mean, it's just a big problem. And so I think this next generation coming up, your students, my students, we really need to encourage them because there's some big challenges out there. There's also great ways to do this. If you work on your derailers, if you build your values, if you have a servant leadership approach, it can be an amazing career. You can create incredible organizations. They're high performing and super fun. You feel like a family and a community. It's just, a powerful business model. So the opportunities are really remarkable.
Awesome, Gregg. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your positive perspective, and action-based tips that we can put to use, and also for all of the tools that you've created to help leaders. Again, to our listeners, make sure that you check out the video description and the links there to tools that can help you. So thank you, Gregg. It's been amazing.
It's my pleasure, Julie. Great to be with you again. And thanks for everything you do at the Scheinfeld Center.
Great. And for our audience, thank you so much for joining us. This semester, we are all about putting passion into action to create livelihoods that matter, to create positive impact that you want to create. And next week, we'll be back with more to help you bring that further along. And that's it. Thanks again, Gregg. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.